Coming up on today's episode, why I take issue with daylight savings, the story of Old Man Fred, and a possible stream schedule, up next on Themindhere. Hey, what is up everyone? It's Theguyhere, and welcome back to another episode of Themindhere, the bi-weekly podcast where I talk about new knowledge I've learned, projects I'm working on, and current events. Topics may be random, but I hope that with each episode you can come away with a fresh perspective on the universe. Welcome to all of you who are here for the first time. If you like my content and want to see more, please consider subscribing. Alright, to start off this episode, let's talk a little bit about daylight savings. As some of you may be aware, daylight savings, just a brief overview of sort of what it is. It's the time between, I believe, March and November, when we shift the clocks forward an hour, and the purpose of this is to lengthen the amount of daylight into the evening, so that you can save on basically lighting, and there's more daylight in the time that people are awake, usually. And this goes back to quite a ways away, quite a way back. I believe I read somewhere that Benjamin Franklin proposed this, had this idea, and there were a couple other people that were involved in making this happen, but the goal was to daylight was precious because lighting was expensive back then. You had to use candles or oil lamps, and even now electricity, right? So being able to have more daylight in the waking hours meant that you could use less lighting, and there would also be additional benefits, having daylight instead of using artificial lighting. So the idea was to make daylight more useful. So in the Northern Hemisphere, that happens between like March and November, where all the clocks spring forward, starting at 2 a.m. and spring back at 2 a.m. On one of those days. And so the idea of it is it's sort of like an economical and productivity reason, but there's some contention about it, and there's debate about it. And some things that I have issues with are that for the most part, this issue no longer exists, at least for the issue of the cost of artificial lighting doesn't really exist anymore in most developed countries, because the cost of electricity is so, for lighting at least, is so negligible compared to other costs and other electricity consuming applications. So this point has been sort of made moot, and although there are still some benefits from daylight, I'll talk a little bit about why that doesn't, why I don't care too much about that personally. But at that point, at least, the economic reasons have subsided. Now, there's also the fact that for most part, some jobs are the typical, they have typical working hours, right? So you have some that are maybe the typical 9 to 5 or 8 to 5, depending on what you do and what you work on. And people like to stay up into the evening, right? However, there are some things that are changing. So the first thing that's changing is that the working hours are no longer as rigid as before, and people typically have plenty of leisure time, either before or after work, depending on when you wake up. And people can schedule their day accordingly, so you don't necessarily need to even keep a consistent schedule sometimes. The company that I'm co-oping with, doing my co-op and rotation with, has a decently flexible schedule, at least for the engineers. So I can, if I have something going on earlier in the day, I can come in and do my hours later in the day. I could spread the hours throughout the week, that sort of thing. So it's pretty flexible, and I imagine that a lot of other places are going with something similar, at least if it's something that's not, you don't have certain shifts you have to come in and work on. So that point has changed a little bit. You can adjust your day accordingly if you really needed to. And the other issue that I take with that is, despite having daylight, typically some people still have blinds closed and they have light on anytime that they're at home. Maybe you're in a sunny place where you don't want the light in, or it's summer and you don't want the light in, right? Or you don't want the sunlight in, so you have artificial lighting inside even though there's sunlight outside. So issues there, because despite the intention to save on certain things, that's not necessarily happening. But one thing that does affect, for daylight at least, something that is important, and this is why I don't like it, why I don't like daylight savings, is that daylight affects when you wake up, especially if you have sort of leaky blinds or if you sleep with your blinds open. If the light comes up earlier in the day, then you might wake up naturally earlier, just based off of the sunlight that comes in. So as a person that likes to, or is aiming to wake up early, whether I've achieved that or not recently is a different story, but I like to wake up early, and that helps me do so in a more natural way instead of relying on alarm clocks and other ways to wake me up sort of unnaturally. So I like the fact that the light is coming in early, and because I found that my energy levels are much higher earlier in the day than later in the day, I can more easily get projects I want to get done personally done in the morning, and then go to work, and then after work leave a little time for leisure because my energy levels would be too low to do anything reasonable or meaningful at that point. So just from a scheduling perspective, daylight savings doesn't really help in that, because if I were in, currently I'm in Arizona time and they don't follow daylight savings, but if I were following daylight savings, then I would have one less hour of daylight in the morning, and I'd have more daylight in the evening when I don't usually need it, because for the most part, again, blinds closed, it's kind of hot here, and there's like a wood floor, so the sunlight that comes in sort of bounces off, and it's a little annoying when I'm here at the desk. So for the most part, blinds are closed and I have artificial lights on, but in the morning it's a bit different because the sun is not as slanted in, so the sun isn't directly hitting the floor, and the brightness of it allows me to open it up without having the apartment here warm up too much. So that's some of the context behind why I like the fact that Arizona doesn't observe daylight savings. And it also just makes certain things a lot easier when you don't have to shift clocks forward and backwards based off of the time of the year, based off the day of the year. And oftentimes people don't adjust to that 1 hour shift forward or backwards, and that can also often cause issues when people are more tired, when they have to wake up to go to work the same time, even though it's not, they didn't get the same hours of sleep, and then that can cause issues when you're driving in a world where there are no self-driving cars, or if you don't take public transit a lot. That can be an issue there too. So daylight savings for me personally just causes way too much complexity and disturbances in normal routine, and the benefits are negligible, at least for me. So after experiencing no daylight savings here in Arizona, I'm finding that I'm quite liking it. So that's my take on it, and maybe something that you can look at and see if you like daylight savings or not. But that's just a thought there. And whether this will change at all in the future, that's it's probably the lowest on anyone's priority list to address with legislation. But anyways, some thoughts on daylight savings. And speaking of time, it's time to move on to the next topic for this episode, which is about the story of Fred. Now, this is a story based on a person, a coworker at the company that I work with, and I'm going to sort of talk about him and my thoughts about him, but I'm using a different name to protect identity there. So this is the story of Old Man Fred. So Old Man Fred comes into his office early every day, And when he comes in, he's met with a wall of emails. Being the successful man that he is, he's worked at the company, worked up his ranks, and at this point, late in his life, he's gotten to a point where a lot of people, he's sort of the focal point of a lot of projects. Everyone sort of has to go through him for approvals or for ideas, or to just know that he's the person they can reliably check on for information. So he gets flooded with a lot of information every day, and sometimes the requests he gets are a little frivolous. It gets in his hair a little bit, the hair that he's sort of losing, and he's gets frustrated at times at work when he sees a lot of these frivolous requests, because that just takes time out of his day and doesn't bring any value. So he gets quite a few of those, but often he's working on certain projects, and of course he decently likes the job that he's doing, and he's glad that he's able to help out. And he works late into the night, late into the hours, works late hours, and then he heads home, does the thing all over again, and he's been doing that for 30 plus years now. So at this point, he's about ready to retire, so he gets and calls up the company HR and talks about retirement plans and getting all that set up, and he's waiting on retirement. He's happy about what he's done, but he's ready to move on to something else. Unfortunately, because the company is a big company, and a company that has a lot of slow, big moving parts, legacy systems, etc., this gets delayed and delayed and delayed. So as he keeps working through his original retirement date, gets a little bit frustrated, but a few interns come in, and he is happy to help them out. There's something new to do, and some new people to train, so he's happy to tell them about things. One particular intern likes to ask a lot of questions, and questions that sometimes are related, but sometimes are tangential to the task at hand. But he's happy to answer them, and in fact go on his own tangents and stories with some experience behind it. Every time a question is asked about a certain tool or a certain process, he talks about what it does, but it also goes into the history of maybe why it's there, who created it, and maybe some context from previous usage of this tool. And oftentimes he says that if he's talking too much, don't be afraid to sort of stop him from it, because he likes to share his experiences. But this intern doesn't mind. In fact, he enjoys the context that it brings behind. Now you can sort of see the parallels and analogies there, but why I wanted to share this story is because I wanted to share sort of why I found him to be an interesting character, and a few lessons I've learned from it. So one thing that I really appreciate about him is that he's a pretty good storyteller, and excuse me, storytelling has the ability to get information across in a fashion where people are much more likely to retain it and much more likely to pay attention while you're giving that information. So it's something that's, I feel like, is somewhat missing in technical communities. So it's something that I appreciate that he's able to do, giving a story, which, although maybe to some it's a little extra fluff, but to me it ties the whole thing together in a rich package, and it's a holistic way to provide information. And not only that, it provides context behind what you're doing. Without context, anything can be turned into literally anything else with any kind of interpretation. But with context, you can then get some clues about maybe origins, or a deeper insight into how it actually behaves, or what the true system is that you're working with. So there's hidden information, and we often think that we have a good scope of what's going on, but most of the time we don't know pretty much anything about what's going on. So any additional information will help with seeing what we're working with and how to make the best decision from that. So I appreciate his ability to give stories about his previous experience and tie them into what we're doing with. And not only that, he's able to sort of share his opinion and some emotion doing that. And although the workplace that I work with is somewhat traditional, very male dominant, and also very restrained in professionalism, maybe not as much as, I don't know, like financial institutions, but it's definitely, I guess, sharing emotions is frowned upon unless it's like directly related to the project you're working on and you're expressing grievances about a customer or something like that. But generally, personal issues like that are frowned upon. So his ability to do that on the occasion is something that I admire him being able to do. So those are some of the things why I appreciate him. And of course, the willingness to help out at all times, and to mentor, and to share his information to sort of the next generation that'll need that information, is something that I appreciate from him. So overall, very kind person, and someone that's very knowledgeable. I can tell that he's definitely earned his way to where he is, but also I can also see how tired he is of the shenanigans that go on within the company, and he's ready to leave at this point. But so I appreciate him and I find him interesting in that aspect. But despite that, or not despite that, but because of that, I've learned a few things where I've talked about in previous episodes about that technician that gave me advice on how to move forward with my co-op and to make it my own, to take initiative over it. The experience I've had here was an interesting one for sure. And there were some things just about the workplace culture that are not satisfactory to me, but with every unideal situation, there's always a few gems of people, of processes, of knowledge, a few nuggets there, a few here and there that are worth taking and worth searching for. So despite not necessarily having the most ideal workplace situation, at least I do have this experience, which is great that I do, and I'm learning a lot from it, both technical and interpersonal and just experiential wise, and the fact that there are these few nuggets that I can take away. Even though some things may not be as great, there's a few there that is worth the experience for. So that's the story of Old Man Fred. Alright, so before I wrap up this episode, just want to talk a bit about possible future streaming schedule. Taking a look at the new schedule that I've laid out for myself, I talked a bit about that daylight savings. The reason why is that I want to shift my schedule so that I wake up quite early, hoping to aim for like 5:30 so that I can get a good 2-3 hours block of time in the morning to work before then going to actual work. And then after work, after I work and then do exercise, come back and have dinner and all that, check up on the various media that I have, I'll most likely be very drained. So I want to, when my energy is low, I want to do things that are low energy and then head to sleep as soon as possible. So then I can spend more time in the high energy state and get more done. As I found out, trying to move against the gradient with energy levels usually doesn't result in much good, because by the time I get to it, I don't really have the energy to do what I set out to do, and therefore any planning that I do at that point is pretty much just not useful, what I set out to do there. So anyways, what this has to do with streaming is that I want to take a look and see maybe get a more consistent schedule up. That way it keeps a bit of a routine and possibly helps grow out the various little hobbies that I have with streaming, YouTube, and other little projects. So I'm looking at maybe Tuesday, Thursday evening. I don't know what time yet, but I'll have that up, and I'll definitely need to revamp a few things to get a lot of channels, like this channel updated, get Twitch updated, and a whole bunch of other things updated, and maybe send out something on Instagram or something like that where I notify people about this schedule in case they're interested in watching me stream and play games or just work and code on other things. So the plan there is to either be doing a few games or to work on some projects and then sort of just talk with whoever pops up there while I work on in the evening. So Tuesdays and Thursdays, and also thinking about Saturday. But something interesting that I want to maybe do is that for the next episodes, possibly streaming them on Saturday. So that would be like every other Saturday basically, and the Saturdays in between episodes will just be like a Tuesday, Thursday thing where I'm either coding or playing some game and streaming that. But maybe on those days, those weekends when I'm scheduled to put out these episodes, I could stream the episodes, stream the podcast episode, and then upload it the next day. So maybe looking into that, experimenting with that, seeing how things go. But those are some ideas I have with streaming. Anyways, that's all for today. Thank you all so much for watching this episode. I appreciate all the support you all have given me. If you found this episode to be interesting or this podcast to be something that's, useful, insightful, or just, something that someone else might find interesting or benefit from, please feel free to share this with them. It helps grow the community, and it means a lot to me that people are enjoying this content. If nothing else, with everything I do, there's a benefit to myself so that it's sustainable and I can keep it going. But hopefully this has a side effect where it helps other people as well. Anyways, take care, stay humble, and I'll see you all in the next episode.